We, are you overhead?
Sure, anytime. No.
We, Boog, Highberger and Marci Francisco are speaking on how things are going or not going in the legislature over in Topeka.
Good way to put it, Paul. Glad they're here.
No, it's on.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Hear me in the back?
No, can't hear you.
Can you hear me? How's this? Better?
That's good.
Can't hear me.
Better, I'd like more.
All right, well, how about this?
Better.
All right, well, we'll work on it. As Paul said, I'm Boog Highberger. I represent 46th District in the Kansas House. It's basically the east side of Lawrence. And my partner here today is?
Marci Francisco from the 2nd District in the Senate.
And Marci has decided to let me go first since I'm the member of the junior house. She is our senior representative, or member in the legislature. Well, it's been a really interesting year over at Topeka this year. The atmosphere is just so much different than it was in the years before. So it makes life a lot easier. And usually by 10:30 in the morning last year, I was angry about something, but I can come home with a smile on my face most days this year. Although things aren't as better as I thought they were. I'm just going to run through some of the key issues that we talked about, and hopefully we'll let Marci explain things from the Senate side, and then leave plenty of time for questions. So, one issue I know that everybody here is interested in is Medicaid expansion. The House did pass, both houses passed a Medicaid expansion bill. Went to the governor, he vetoed it, it came back. The House fell 3 short votes of an override. And I don't think we're dead. I don't think we're dead for the year though. What we passed was just a straight Medicaid expansion, just with the typical parameters of the federal program. What I think is happening right now is there will be some behind the scenes negotiation to come up with a Kansas model based loosely on something that Indiana has done. It will likely involve co-pays and a work requirement, but I think if some details get hammered out behind the scenes, we can do this again and get this through the House with a veto-approved majority in both houses. That's my guess. I'll let Marci comment on whether she thinks that's possible or not. The House K-12 Budget Committee has drafted a education funding plan that looks pretty good. It starts out with by basically readopting the funding formula. Sorry, the funding formula that we had a couple of years ago that was too complicated for the governor. Although it was one that was education experts around the country thought was one of the best school financing formulas in the country. So we basically adopted that with some minor modifications. I think there's less funding for bilingual education. And with a new higher base aid per pupil amount, starting at $4,006 in the next school year and ramping up $200 a year until it gets to $4,806 in fiscal year 22. And so that's just coming out of committee. It hasn't really gone to the House yet. In its infinite wisdom, the House decided to have the legislature reviewed for constitutionality by former Senator Jeff King of Independence. I know, it drives me nuts. So it was a 7-2 vote in the Legislative Coordinating Council, 7 Republicans versus 2 Democrats. Senator King is known for his antagonism toward the judicial system. He's the one who came out in favor of Medicaid expansion after his local hospital had closed. I've heard estimates of the fees ranging up to $50,000. I think it's a travesty. But Senator King is going to review our school financing plan. He will, of course, find that it is constitutional because the Supreme Court has never challenged the constitutionality of the funding mechanism that we had before. The only problem before is that it wasn't adequately funded. So after that is done, I suspect this will pass the House, and I don't know what they'll do in the Senate, or Marci might have some insights on that. The budget, good news is we balanced the budget for the rest of the current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. Bad news is we borrowed $291 million from the state pooled money investment fund, and delayed some payments to Capers in order to do it. And that is really bad public policy, I'll admit it, even though I voted for it. But the alternative was massive budget cuts, the likes of which we haven't seen yet. I think they were looking at a 4% annualized cut across the board for state agencies, universities, and K-12. If we had done that by the time we passed this bill, it would have been 4% for a quarter of the fiscal year. So it would have been basically a 16% cut for the remainder funds from the remainder of the year. And I don't think anybody had the appetite for that. So we did our bad public policy. The bill we actually got out of conference committee reduced the delayed payments to Capers by some from the original, so that's an improvement. They're monies that mostly we're supposed to pay in the future. We'll see how that goes, but we have made arrangements, so we should have maybe a $50 million ending balance at the end of the current fiscal year, we hope. Now, I actually don't have much information on current negotiations about the outgoing year's budget. I hope Marci can fill us in on that. We'll see. And given that look, I'm not sure she can, but all right, okay. Taxes. Early in the session, both houses passed a tax bill that really undid a lot of the San Brand Act experiment. It did away with the LLC exemption, which sometimes is called the small business tax break, which is not a small business tax break. 2/3 of the, I'm gonna back up. Right now in Kansas, if you are an LLC, you're a sole proprietor, or you're a farmer, you don't pay any Kansas income tax on your income. And this has been called a small business tax break, but it is a Koch brothers tax break. 2/3 of the benefit, well, 1/3 of the benefit of this break goes to the top 0.5% of filers. 2/3 of it goes to the top 5%. So this is sold as a way to jumpstart small businesses, create jobs. There's no evidence whatsoever that it's created any jobs. So I think a majority of both houses is ready to do away with it. The bill we passed also reinstated a third top tax bracket, although it reinstated it at 5.45% rather than 6.45%. And it did away with the what they call a ratchet, which is this provision that was passed in 2012, saying that when state income rises, state income tax rates automatically go down the next year. So we passed that. Governor vetoed it, of course. The House overrode his veto, but the Senate came out 3 votes short. And so I think we're going to have to go back and revisit that. Oh yeah, since the governor's finally come around, he realized, sort of admitted that the experiment's not working. So since the current experiment isn't working, let's try a new one. And that new one was the so-called flat tax, which Marci will talk more about. It's extremely regressive tax, falls heavily on the lowest earners, and it went down to a 3-37 defeat in the Senate, which is well deserved. So we're back to the drawing board. I think we'll ultimately end up with something close to our original tax plan, which by itself, it fell about $200 million short of what we needed to be. That was even before the education decision came out, which I think with the House plan, we're going to need another $150 million there. And then to make our delayed Capers payments, and we're still a long way from where we need to be, but I think we're heading in the right direction. Guns on campus, I know that's something that's very important to a lot of people here. The House tried, the leadership has been very good about not letting any bills involving guns come above the line on the House floor for a vote, so we can't amend them. We had tried a procedural move last week that would have taken 7 votes to bring a bill to the floor that we could have amended with to do away with to reinstate the exemption for campuses. Moderates didn't come through, it failed. So what I've been hearing is that there's some sort of compromise being negotiated behind the scenes. Will probably involve the KU hospital, probably not universities. And also I'm not going to tell you the source of where I heard this, but I've heard that university administrations are backed off and are not pushing to have a vote on the campus exemptions. I think because they're afraid how it might affect their funding. So I'm really dismayed about how much influence the State Rifle Association still has over in the State House, even with a lot of so-called moderates. So abortion restrictions, we passed the abortion, we passed another, I think, useless and unconstitutional abortion bill this year. We added additional restrictions to abortion providers, required them to give 24 hours notice to patients of the year that the doctor performing the procedure graduated from medical school, the year they started work at the place they're working, and whether they've had any disciplinary actions. How many of you know what year your doctor got his medical license? That's what I thought. Does it affect the quality of your care? That's what I thought. So this bill is likely to be unconstitutional. I think one of my colleagues determined that we spent $1 million defending the last abortion bill in court, paying lawyers $750 an hour. My feeling is if you really want to reduce the number of abortions, we could take that $1 million and do something that would actually make people's lives better and reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions. But that's just a liberal lawyer from Lawrence talking. Teacher due process. We actually passed. We had a great day in the House one Wednesday right at the start of the session. We passed reinstated teacher due process. We passed Medicaid expansion, and we passed the tax bill. And the teacher due process bill is still sitting below the line in the Senate. I'm not actually sure it's even gone to the committee. Marci might know more about that. There are a couple other minor issues. I got my first bill through the House of Representatives this year. It was a bill to ban most kinds of robocalls. I know you all love them. It has been assigned to the Federal and State Affairs Committee in the House. I'm probably too late for hearing this year, but maybe if we're around all of May and we get bored, we might have some committee meetings. It's hard to tell. I'm going to let it go there, let Marci talk. There's a number of other issues, but Marci will probably cover most of them. So thank you. And anytime you ever have any questions about any state issues, don't hesitate to give me a call or email, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Representative Highberger did a great job, so I'm glad he got us started. And in fact, we have seen more action in the House than in the Senate this year. So we saw the House work hard on a tax plan, and that was the tax plan that was passed by both houses. The couple of members of the Senate said that, oh, we're very concerned about what happens to people's W-2s if we start collecting it at this point in the year. They immediately put in another bill that would be the same as the bill that we passed, and then said, oh, we'll just let it linger below the line because we want to look at this other experiment. So as Representative Highberger said, the one thing that we did get accomplished in both the House and the Senate and are waiting, I don't know that the governor has signed it yet, the bill that addresses the budget for the current year that we're in. We started off with a $350 million estimated shortfall. We are lucky to see some additional revenue coming in, but we still need $280 million, and again, have chosen to borrow that money from the Treasurer's Unclaimed Property Fund. So that's not a very good place to be able to report that we are by this time in the session. The Senate did pass a bill for the upcoming budget for the next 2 fiscal years, 18 and 19, but it really was a minimum of what we needed, and in fact an amendment was offered by the chair of that committee on the floor to roll it back and not have the money to repay some of the borrowing that we've done from CAPERS. The good news about that bill was that it would eliminate the governor's plan to securitize tobacco proceeds. So we would be spending money from the Children's Initiative Fund on early childhood education. It added a 2% salary increase for state employees, some of which have not seen any salary increase for 10 years. So an important thing to be including in that budget. And a 5% rate increase for home and community-based services. So we provide home care for people with developmental disabilities, other disabilities, and we have also held the salary for those individuals providing that care at a very low rate for that same 10 years. The bill also restores the cuts to higher education that had been deemed to be unfair. Last year's, or I guess it was last year, they decided to cut funds from higher education based on the total amount of income for those institutions rather than just the state-supported income. Because of that, the University of Kansas and Kansas State University, who both have a considerable amount of research dollars coming into those institutions, were cut a percentage of those research dollars in addition to state support. So, doesn't make a lot of sense. The argument was they have more money that they can figure out what to do with, but if you are getting research dollars, you've signed a contract with that granting authority, and you cannot take any of those dollars and apply them towards other expenses at the university. So that was a good.
How can they tax that?
I'm sorry?
How can the state tax research grant money?
They did not tax research grant money. They figured out their state allocation based on the total amount of income institutions are receiving rather than the amount of state income that institutions are receiving. So in essence, they gave those institutions that had research dollars less funds overall from the state.
Was the intention to punish those two institutions?
The intention, it's hard to know what people's intentions are. The proposal came from the senator who represents Pittsburgh State University, and may have just been a way to make sure that that university didn't lose funding, but it was not done as part of a bill. It was an amendment on the floor. And unfortunately accepted by the conference committee. So, Boog talked about how different the year has been this year than in the past. And it isn't because we're seeing necessarily a lot of good legislation passed, but we're seeing much less bad legislation be introduced. And it would be harder, I think, to pass or even get to the floor some of the proposals we have seen in the past. So nobody's been talking about eliminating due process from community colleges or having, I guess, more gun bills, and they probably haven't had more gun bills. We usually have regularly, have been doing one every session, and that may be because the fear that if that comes to the floor, it would be very easy to get an amendment to address the concerns about concealed carry. So what's been happening in the Senate is the budget bills, the tax bills, except for this last one, have been passing 25 to 15, 27 to 13, and those individuals who have not been supporting the budget or the taxes, except for one, are senators who have been in the legislature before, most in the Senate, some in the House, and in the last 4 years had been given a chance to try to address any concerns they had about the state budget and whether cuts should be made. Instead of making cuts, they borrowed money. And I think that's very telling in terms of their commitment to actually getting that lowered budget accomplished. So it's easy to get up and say, we should cut the budget, we should find expenditure that are not necessary. It's harder to actually identify them and propose that. So here we are. Unfortunately, we need 27 votes in the Senate to override a veto. So we didn't get that. We did see the tax proposal that some people have referred to as a flat tax. I'm trying to be specific in calling it a single tier tax. It's an income tax proposal that would allow for deductions and credits, but then charge that income tax at the same rate, no matter how much taxable income you have. We've also discussed in the Senate Tax Committee a true flat tax, and that would mean you pay one tax on your adjusted gross income and wouldn't get deductions. So that would do away with the standard deduction, with the historic tax credit, with the earned income tax credit, and that's what many consider to be a flat tax. The other things about that proposal were pretty good. They did eliminate the ratchet and the increased reduction in earnings. It eliminated the non-wage income exemption, what people refer to as the LLC loophole. It raised the standard deductions. It restored 100% medical deduction and 100% property deduction. Right now, when you fill out your Kansas tax, you have to add back in, if you've itemized, add back in half of the property tax that you paid. It reduced the sales tax on food from 6.5 to 5.5%. And one thing that might be interesting to people here, it did have a provision that would tax the employee contributions to the Board of Regents retirement funds. One of the reasons that that is being proposed is right now those individuals who are part of CAPERS, the Kansas Public Employee Retirement System, are taxed on their contributions. So if one of our arguments about the non-wage